Oh no, 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 Baldur's Gate bros. I thought I thought that Baldur's Gate 3 was the best-selling game of 2023. I thought it was the most critically acclaimed, best game ever that everyone was playing and that everyone was obsessed with. Why exactly did Hogwarts Legacy sell twice the amount of Baldur's Gate 3 in like the same amount of time? Can anyone explain this to me? Why Hogwarts Legacy has doubled the sales of Baldur's Gate 3? Could it possibly be because Hogwarts Legacy was a better game from a better IP that was available on a better video game console, the Nintendo Switch? Could that be why this game did better? It's very interesting looking back at the hype cycle of Baldur's Gate 3 and what it eventually ended up being, because I called it immediately, where I said it was just a bunch of weird terminally online grifters who were, spurging out over Baldur's Gate because they were huge fans of D&D and they were trying to legitimize all the weird sexually degenerate aspects of Baldur's Gate, completely ignoring all the better games that were coming out that year on Nintendo consoles. Hogwarts Legacy and Tears of the Kingdom are two examples, but it really does need to be emphasized that Hogwarts Legacy kind of destroyed Baldur's Gate in every single category. It was a better fantasy game. It did sell more. It did have like more appealing gameplay to the masses. What exactly did Baldur's Gate 3 have going for it outside of the illusion of like choices? Like I have never heard anyone say anything riveting or engaging or original about Baldur's Gate that did not hinge around choices. Like outside of that, Baldur's Gate 3 has no appeal. It's not popular. It's not interesting. Plenty of people were playing it who were wishing it was actually an action RPG instead. Like the simple fact of the matter is everything Baldur's Gate does, Fire Emblem does better, Xenoblade does better. And when you have like mass market games, games that open world, RPG style structure, like, Hogwarts Legacy and Tears of the Kingdom were better. Like, it is really interesting to see just the end result of all that shilling, all that hype, all that false praise. The critics rallied behind Baldur's Gate, and this was the result, is that they got positively demolished by Hogwarts Legacy, and it's only going to get worse from here. You are going to see Hogwarts Legacy continue to sell over the next decade. You are going to see Harry Potter remain relevant while Wizards of the Coast and everything involved with D&D continues to decline with the death of the boomers, because that's become very apparent to me as I've gotten into like trading card games and I've gotten into like board games and stuff like that. Wizards of the Coast isn't competitive. Their entire brand hinges on like the fact that like it's D&D, and they don't really have any ability to compete or create anything original. Nintendo is stomping them when it comes to the Pokemon trading card game. They're stomping them when it comes to the video games. They're stomping them when it comes to like film adaptions. They're stomping them when it comes to like, their business in general. And this was a very interesting like example of that, in which the entire industry tried to gaslight you into thinking Baldur's Gate 3 was the greatest thing in the history of video games, when in actuality, it was pretty handedly outperformed by several games that year. And it was all just a giant smokescreen, propped up by boomer game journos and millennial YouTubers. Like, and again, like, I think that is becoming more and more obvious, like, over time, because Expedition 33 has come out now, and not only did it sell less than Baldur's Gate 3, a lot of the Baldur's Gate audience are pulling the same tactics with Expedition 33, like saying it's better than other games in the genre, saying it's game of the year, saying it's one of the best games ever made. And like the actuality of it is that like people are actually seeing through it this time. People are actually asking very good questions. Chief among them, and I think this is something that does need to be talked about, is Baldur's Gate 3 better than Expedition 33? Because you have the same group of people saying that both of these games are the best games ever made, and that they're amazing, phenomenal experiences, the best RPGs ever. And I'm just like, well, which one's better than the other? And like the simple fact of the matter is you'll never see them like make that comparison. You'll see them like cry about Japanese RPGs all the time. and you'll see them cry about Zelda and like Nintendo exclusives, but like when it comes to Expedition versus Baldur's Gate 3, those guys are like, just unwilling to address the elephant in the room, is that like neither of these games are really being compared to each other all that much because it's fake. The simple fact of the matter is this entire situation was fake. Nobody cared about Baldur's Gate 3. Nobody cared about Expedition 33. Like, the entire purpose of these games is to downplay, like, the far superior Japanese games that come out. Like, Baldur's Gate 3 paled in comparison to Zelda, paled in comparison to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, paled in comparison to Pokemon. I believe did not even sell as much as Pokemon, actually. A single generation of Pokemon. A very controversial generation of Pokemon for that matter. Baldur's Gate 3 was not this like industry defining thing, and we've gotten new Nintendo games since then. And that's the trend we're seeing these days when it comes to releases like this, is that people hype up Expedition 33, they hype up Baldur's Gate 3, they hype up, I don't know, Hollow Knight, and then like guess what? It takes a team to put out like 8 years to put out a sequel, and by that time Nintendo has like several dozen new games from all their different franchises out and in the wild, and some of them are like better than what came before, as opposed to like developers like say CD Projekt Red, who have never been able to follow up on The Witcher 3. Like, that's kind of what we're seeing now, honestly. Is the way the industry operates is that they throw all of their weight behind hyping up one game on like very specific platforms from a specific part of the world to try and sell you on this idea that like this is the future of video games. These are the new up and coming talents. These are like, this is supposed to be the next big thing. And it's just like increasingly like it's just not working anymore. Like Hogwarts Legacy was something that the industry rallied to try and destroy, and they spent all of their efforts trying to prop up Baldur's Gate 3 instead. And what ended up happening is that Hogwarts Legacy sold twice the amount of Baldur's Gate 3. Like Tears of the Kingdom, which they also tried to downplay to a certain extent, admittedly not as much so. Tears of the Kingdom like also did about the same amount as Baldur's Gate 3. Actually, it did slightly better. So, with that being said, like looking at these numbers, like what exactly made Baldur's Gate 3 so popular among its audience? The answer is very simple, that it was a very woke, subversive game that was pushing like the elements that the game industry wants to push in the future. They had gay shit, they had degenerate shit, they had woke shit. As we now know, they were already experimenting with generative AI, and Swen is now going out and like shilling for the ideas that like we're gonna use AI and replace our artists, and like it's ridiculous how far Larian has fallen in the past 3 years. But in actuality, they were always like this. The whole image that Swen cultivated, that he was like this base guy, like putting out games that he enjoyed because he loves his audience so much. The idea that he doesn't abuse his employees and he puts out games that are completely finished and bug free, like all of that was very demonstratively not true. I was talking about how the game felt unfinished, like when it came out, and like to this day, people still are in denial about that. But what we've been seeing over the past several weeks is just this slow admission that Baldur's Gate 3 has not remained relevant. Elden Ring has not remained relevant. Expedition 33 has not remained relevant. And what has remained relevant are games like this. Games like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Games like Mario and Luigi Brothership. Games like Princess Peach Showtime. Games like Bayonetta 3. Like, so many of these games are reaching a huge audience on Switch 2 and will be talked about and played for a very, very, very long time. And as a result of that, we are going to see more and more people start to acknowledge that Nintendo has won the console war, and everyone else is just trying to keep up the illusion. You know how in Dark Souls, how like Gwendolyn is in like, I don't know, trying to create the illusion that like everything's fine on Orlando and stuff like that. Like it's kind of like that, honestly. Like, we are in this situation where the entire gaming industry is rallying to keep up the illusion that amazing games are coming out of the Western gaming industry all the time, when in reality, they haven't done jack shit in 25 years.